Thank you. All right, so I'm going to talk about ageism and the autistic community. I'm going to... Well, that's interesting. We seem to have lost a slide. No, we just lost a heading. It's all right. So I'm not disorganised. Honestly, what happened was when I sent my slides through, they reformatted them to be a different shape on the screen. So I'm a little bit surprised because a few things seem to have disappeared, like some headings and some bullet points. So if you see me kind of look at my slides funny, it's because what I've got isn't quite what I sent in a few places. So it did say at the top, what is autism? And I'm sure most of you know, but I'm just going to do a really, really quick what is autism flash thing in a couple of minutes, just for anyone who doesn't know, but that's not the focus of my talk. If you want to know more about what is autism, shameless plug here, you can buy my book at the back of the room, and I'll even sign it for you, and you can meet my lovely husband, or you can catch me anytime today and ask me a question, because I'll talk your leg off. All right, so autism is a lifelong neurodevelopmental condition which affects the way that we communicate and interact with the world. It's not linear, so it's not like people are very autistic at this end and not very autistic at that end. It's a spectrum, which means that we have different strengths and different challenges in different areas. And approximately 1 in 70 people are autistic, and that's a bit of a rubbery figure because of all the changes in the way that we recognise autism, improvements in diagnosis, and a whole range of other things which I won't go into. Now, I want to be careful about generalisations because obviously every autistic person is different because of that spectrum, because we all have different challenges and different strengths. And you've probably heard that expression, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, and that's very true. I have multiple of them. I'm an autistic person. I have 2 autistic sons. The 3 of us are very different to each other. But we have a lot in common with other autistic people. So when I talk about what it's like to be an autistic person and the challenges that autistic people, and particularly ageing autistic people, face, I'm not saying that every single thing I talk about today is going to impact every single autistic person, because we are all different. I'm talking about things that are more likely to be an issue for autistic people, or generally speaking, more of an issue for a group of autistic people than a group of non-autistic people. So they are generalisations, but they are fairly consistent across our community. So this is my very brief, autism in 60 seconds. When people think about autism who are not autistic and don't have much exposure to autistic people, we see those stereotypes. We've all seen The Good Doctor, we've seen those sorts of TV shows, and you see that external presentation, what it looks like on the outside. As an autistic person, I'm not that interested in that. I'm interested in what it feels like on the inside. So these are the key things that are important on the inside. Probably the biggest one, and the one that isn't really recognised by particularly clinicians, is sensory sensitivities. Almost every autistic person has sensory sensitivities, over or under sensitive to some sensory issue. So, for example, you might notice these lights are a little bit bright. To me, those lights are so bright that I'm actually really, really focused on those lights. So 50% of my attention is on, oh my gosh, those lights are so bright. I'm trying not to look at them so I can actually think about what I'm saying. In the workplace, that meant that I either had to put paper over all the lights in my office or I would have a headache by lunchtime. So when autistic people talk about sensory sensitivities and we say the lights are bright or the sounds are loud or that smell is strong, we don't mean it's a little bit irritating. We mean it hurts. It actually causes me pain. It makes me feel sick. It stops me being able to focus, to concentrate. So those things are huge, and that will come into play when I talk about what happens as we get older.
Should we turn the lights off?
I think your camera people will hate you, so I'm kind of used to it. All right, we tend to prefer routines. We like things to be the same. I have the same thing for breakfast every morning. I have the same thing for lunch every day. I have 2 or 3 things that I have for dinner I don't like variety. During the COVID lockdowns, I had chicken and corn soup from Woolies, you know, in the little plastic tub, Darius chicken and corn soup. I had it every night for almost 2.5 years because it was consistent, it was the same. No matter what else was happening in the world, my soup was the same. We don't like change. When they changed the labels, it was devastating for me because then I thought, what if they change the inside, right? Again, that comes into play when we think about what's going to happen when I get older. We have challenges with social interaction and communication. I love standing up here talking to you. This is great because the rules are really clear. I talk, you listen. It's great, okay? But afterwards, it's really confusing when you come up and talk to me. How long am I allowed to talk for? When do I have to stop? Is it my turn? How do I start the conversation? How do I stop the conversation? We tend to have highly focused and specific interests. So like I said, you want to talk to me about autism? I'll talk to you for days. You want to talk to me about dolls? You'll need weeks, right? You want to talk to my son about Transformers? Sit down. Don't expect to move for the rest of the year. That's great in some senses. So like as an academic, I was a very good academic because if I was interested, I knew everything. We tend to engage in repetitive behaviours. So you've all seen that stereotype of, you know, kids spinning plates or playing with trains. I knit. That's how I can, if I'm knitting, I'm focused, right? If I've got my knitting in my hands, 100% of my attention is on the conversation because I'm not thinking about the lights, the noise, the smells, everything else. That's taking my energy and I can focus on you. I take my knitting everywhere. I have literally hundreds of knitted blankets in my house. I have thousands of knitted dolls' clothes. I have buckets of knitted babies' clothes. I don't have any babies. My kids are 30 and 31, but I have, you know, you never know what you might want to do with them. All right, so this is autism very quickly. That will come into play later when we talk about getting older. All right, language preferences. You may have noticed that I say I am autistic. That, and anyone who works in disability will probably have been told, you know, that, you know, put the person first. We talk about person with disability. In our community, predominantly, we don't feel very comfortable with that because when you think about all the things that I've just explained to you, autism is central to my identity. I am not a person with autism. I don't separate it from me. It's the way my brain is wired. It's who I am as a human being. It's not something that I put down. It's not something I live with. It's not something I suffer from. It's who I am as a human being. I like who I am, right? I'm very comfortable being an autistic person. It comes with some challenges. It comes with some strengths, right? I am an exceptionally good academic because I am autistic, because of the way my brain works. I write books because I am autistic, because of the way my brain works, because it is just tuned to doing what it does. So I speak that way about myself because that's the way that I feel comfortable, and I will do that throughout this conversation. If I get time at the end, I'll come back to something that happened yesterday that relates to that and relates to the theme of today, if I get time. All right, so I'm going to talk about some problems, and then I'm going to talk about some solutions and how you can be part of them. Problem number one, now we're talking about ageism and the autistic community. We are invisible. So I did a Google search, image search. If you do a Google image search for the word autism, this is what comes up. If you do a Google word search for autism, similar thing. Everything that comes up is about children. And if you talk to people about autism, this is what they think about. So when people talk about autism, think about autism, read about autism, do research about autism, they think about children. This is the stereotype, this is the image in people's heads. If you talk to the ABS, that's what they think about too. So these are ABS figures about what autism prevalence looks like. So the Australian Bureau of Statistics will tell you that autism predominantly exists between the ages of 5 and 20. Now, for a lifelong condition, we all know it's a lot. How could that possibly be true? It can't. So obviously, you don't appear at the bottom end of that scale because you weren't diagnosed yet. This is not autism prevalence by age. This is prevalence of people with an autism diagnosis who report that when they complete the census. Not the same thing at all. But those really misleading statistics are what people are told and what people believe about the prevalence of autism in our community. And that scares me, because when I talk to some organisations, I remember recently I was asked, someone contacted me, they were saying they were putting together topics for a group of aged care providers, potential topics for upcoming talks. And they had suggested autism, and if their topic was suggested, would I be interested? And I said, yeah, probably. And they came back to me and they said, oh, sorry, my topic wasn't chosen because they said none of them have any autistic clients. And I said, well, that's fine, I don't mind not being chosen, because that's right. But it's probably worth saying to them, actually, they do. And the fact that they don't know that they do is concerning. Because autism prevalence actually looks like that. And in reality, it actually looks like that because so many of us are not diagnosed. And we're not diagnosed for a whole bunch of reasons, to do with issues with the diagnostic process and issues with the fact that if you haven't got a diagnosis by the time you reach your early 20s, you're highly unlikely to get one unless you're rich, because it's not covered by Medicare, so it's going to cost you a couple of $1,000s. So most people can't afford it. All right. Let's talk about the research. So there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of research articles on autism. You can imagine, hundreds of thousands, probably closer to 1 million in the history of all time. But in the history of all time, there have been 212 research papers on older autistic adults. Just think about that. Of all the hundreds of thousands of them, 212 looked at older autistic adults. But that was older, defined as 50 plus. That's it. That's all the research that's been done. Largely focused on cognition, the brain, and genetics. So they were scientists. 9 articles on the support needs of autistic people over the age of 50. In the whole research corpus, 9. And none on residential care. So when people ask me to come and talk about autism and ageing in any forum, I have to say, I can't tell you what the research says, even though I'm a researcher and I like to talk about what the research says. I can't really tell you what the research says. I will, but that only takes me 30 seconds because it doesn't say very much. I can talk to you about what I know from my advocacy work, from my interactions with older autistic adults, and from my own experience as a approaching ageing autistic adult. All right, the very limited research that does exist says that a lack of social support contributes to quality of life. That's probably not surprising. There is a higher likelihood that older autistic adults will live in group or residential settings. Again, obviously not surprising, given that we're talking about a group of people who, as a whole, are more likely to have issues forming friendships, forming relationships. So not surprisingly, more likely to end up in residential settings as they age. We do know that current models of ageing well may not be appropriate for older autistic people. I mean, I know whenever I watch ads on TV for aged care homes, they scare the living daylights out of me because they will show all these groups of people all sitting closely together, hugging each other and singing songs in these brightly lit rooms. And I think, oh, no thanks, I'll just stay home by myself. We know that older autistic people may be reluctant to disclose to doctors, hospitals, healthcare providers, everyone, because of the stigma and stereotypes that are associated with both ageing and disability. All right, so that's our first problem. We're just not there. We're invisible. People don't know that we exist. Problem number 2 is that where we do exist and where we are known to exist, we experience systemic discrimination. So you probably all know this first part because you're all here, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. Discrimination and ageing. So people of all ages show bias against older adults. You know that from the beautiful artworks and from your own experience. Sadly, this includes older adults themselves. So there's lots of research that says that even older people themselves have negative perceptions about themselves and about what ageing is like. These negative stereotypes about ageing impact all aspects of older adults' lives. but it also impacts the way that health professionals interact with older patients, including the interpretation of symptoms and the treatments they offer. I've done a lot of research in my past life into asthma, and it's amazing how many older people with asthma get told by doctors, oh, well, it just, you're getting older, and, so you slow down. And, breathing difficulties are not uncommon as you get older, and they don't get diagnosed with asthma. And the internalised ageism impacts physical and mental health and happiness and well-being. So people who start to think, well, yeah, I'm getting older, and, I've watched all those TV shows, old people are grumpy, and they are miserable, and they are lonely, and they are isolated, and people take those perceptions on board. But actually, as people age, lots of good things do happen. Many older people become more creative and generative. Look at this beautiful artwork. I run creative writing workshops for autistic people in my community. And a lot of the people who come to that are older autistic people who've never written before. The last workshops I ran, my oldest participant was 78, and his writing was amazing, and he hadn't written before because he didn't think he could until he got to be 78 and thought, hey, I'm going to give it a go. As people age, they tend to get better at regulating their emotions. And you'll hear people who say, look at my dad with the grandkids. He was never like that as a parent. They often become more agreeable and more conscientious. They report greater happiness and life satisfaction. It's true that some of our cognitive skills might slow a bit over time, but others improve. Our ability to ignore distractions, our ability to orient our attention, we make important contributions to the community. So there's lots of great things that come from ageing and from older people. And we know that people who take in more negative age beliefs show worse physical, cognitive and mental health. So if as I get older, believe those negative things about ageing, it will actually negatively impact on my health. But the good news, there is good news. I was told to bring good news in my talk. The good news is that if you develop positive age beliefs or you're exposed to positive age belief, your health, mental and physical health improves. So if you believe that getting older is good and getting older is positive, your health, physical and mental health improves. So that's ageing. Let's talk about discrimination and autism, which for most of you is probably the bit that you know a little bit less about, and unfortunately is just as depressing. Okay, so we did a survey. We asked 634 autistic adults some questions about their lives. So these are the questions that we asked them. We asked them about how they felt about things like, did they feel socially isolated? Did they feel criticised by other people? Had they lost friends? And this is what we found. So these are Australian autistic adults living in the community. 70% felt socially isolated. Over half said people criticised them for their organisation and planning. Over half had lost friends because of the way that people responded to their autism. Half of them had lost jobs. 43% said they felt unable to leave their house because they're worried about people responding negatively to them because of the way that their autism impacts them. Almost a third said there are people in their family that they don't speak to because of the reactions to them being autistic. And that goes back to what I was saying about these people being more likely to end up living in residential care. Now we ask them, this was just in the last 12 months, have you been treated unfairly because you are autistic in any of these situations? And again, making or keeping friends, 63%. By your family, 60%. Getting help for physical or psychological health problems. So why would you go to a doctor or a psychologist or any healthcare professional and say, I'm autistic, if half of these people said, when I told them I was autistic, I was treated unfairly? And as someone with chronic health conditions who spends a lot of time in hospitals and doctor surgeries, I can tell you that's very true. Because I know being in hospital, when you tell them you're autistic, they start to talk to you a lot more slowly. They start to tell you that you don't need what you think that you need. They talk to you in a completely different way. So that word carries with it this whole stigma and misperception that therefore you must be stupid and your healthcare needs are less relevant. And that does make us uncomfortable disclosing, but if we don't disclose, so it's a real bind. If I go into the hospital and I don't say I'm autistic, then you're not going to understand that the sensory issues are huge for me. You're not going to understand that I have difficulty communicating with you, explaining my symptoms, explaining what I need. But if I do tell you, then you're actually not going to treat me in the same way. You're going to start talking down to me. You're going to not listen to what I'm saying. People saying they were a third of people said they were discriminated against in getting income support or welfare benefits. A third of people said they were discriminated against or treated unfairly in shopping. These people are experiencing systemic discrimination just by virtue of the way that we interact with the world. And this, to me, was the really scary part. 42% said that just in the last year they had been avoided or shunned by people who knew they were autistic. So why would I want to tell people that? Over half said they stopped themselves from developing a close personal relationship because they're autistic, because their experience of stigma told them that if I let this person know I'm autistic, if I let them see the real me, they're not going to want to be my friend. So I'm just not even going to try to make friends. 92% said that they needed to conceal or hide their autistic traits from other people. And there is an enormous body of research that says that autistic people can. We do a really good job. We can hide the fact that we're autistic. We can get through life pretending to be just like you, right? We can hide our repetitive behaviours, we can hide our communication challenges, we can hide our sensory issues. And the impact on our mental health is enormous. The impact on our physical health is enormous. We end up with massive chronic health conditions. We end up with huge psychological health problems. But we can do it. And 92% of us feel pressured to do it in order to feel accepted and fit in. So as I said, systemic discrimination that autistic people experience in our communities, because we're seen to have all these challenges, all these negative things about being autistic, but actually we have lots of strengths. Like I said, when I talked right at the beginning about I actually like being an autistic person, we come with lots of strengths. All of these things, we're logical. Oh, something weird happened there. That actually had a whole bunch of different things on it, and now it's got the same things. So I don't know what happened to that. Like I said, a few of my diagrams had very weird things happen to them. Anyway, there were actually more things on there. But we're empathetic, we're creative thinkers, we're punctual, we're detail-oriented, we're focused, we're driven, we're honest, we're kind. We do have so many strengths and good qualities that are not recognised because people see the outside. People don't see what it's like to be an autistic person. They see, how does that autism impact them? How does my behaviour impact them? And that's where that discrimination comes from. It comes from, well, if I behave like an autistic person, I make you feel uncomfortable. If I behave like a non-autistic person, I make me feel uncomfortable. And so most of us go through life thinking, well, it's much better to make me feel uncomfortable than it is to make you feel uncomfortable. I don't, because I know you're all nice people and I can just be me and you'll be all right with it. All right, so when we put those two things together, we've got age-related discrimination and stigma, and we've got autism-related discrimination and stigma, and my community sits in the middle. So we get both. So in our research, so this is just to talk about how those things work together. In the research we did, so as well as doing research with autistic people, I do research with non-autistic people to ask them, hey, what do you think about us? So what we found was, when we asked people, well, how do you feel about interacting with autistic people? People are so we asked them about different situations. How would you feel if this happened to you, if this autistic person came into your life? People were a lot more comfortable with the idea of an autistic child moving in next door than the idea of an autistic adult moving in next door. Autistic child moves in next door, that's fine. Yeah, they're cute, we like that. Autistic adult moves in next door, yeah, not so sure about that. They're comfortable with their child having an autistic classmate. If their child makes friends with another autistic kid, that's okay. An autistic colleague, not so comfortable. An autistic boss, definitely not comfortable. All right? Actually, if you ever want to talk to any of my staff, I was a good boss. I was a really good boss. I know this because the book that I've just finished writing, that's not out yet, which is called Autistics at Work, because I started writing this book about what it's like to be an autistic person in the workplace. But then I'm a thinker, and I thought, if I write a book about what it's like for me to be an autistic person in the workplace, that's only part of the story. The other part of the story is what's it like for the people working with me. So I asked them. I did an anonymous LinkedIn survey of my contacts and asked them, like, don't send the answers to me, send the answer to a research assistant. What's it like working with me? And I was really surprised because I thought that also was awful, like, because it was anonymous, so they could say whatever they liked. And I thought they'd all say, oh, she was horrible. But they didn't. Apparently I'm a really good boss, and I was really, all those things I showed you on the slide. I was kind and compassionate and understanding and all those things. So all these people who said, oh, I don't want an autistic boss, it's not true, we're not awful. But that stereotype, that stigma that I talked about is there. So autistic children are okay, but they're not so comfortable with the idea of autistic adults coming into their lives. All right, so we've got problem 1, we're invisible. Problem 2, if we are visible, we're going to face that systemic discrimination and stigma. And problem number 3, which is the topic of today's event, we are at increased risk of violence and abuse. So again, starting with the bit that you probably all know, older people are at high risk of abuse. So 1 in 6 older people living in the community experienced elder abuse in 2020. That really scared me. 1 in 6. Jacinta will know all this, but I didn't, because I know about my community. I don't know so much about the broader community. 12% experienced psychological abuse. That really disturbed me. But 1 in 6 older people in our community experienced elder abuse. I'm really glad that I have a good relationship with my kids. I highly recommend being autistic and having autistic family members, because we actually really like each other, right? And we really like being with each other. My son, he's 30, he still lives at home. He will always live at home. He doesn't want to go anywhere else. So I'm not worried that when I get old, my kids will do anything awful or stick me in a home, because they want to be with me. So I highly recommend being autistic. Remember I said there were some good things about it? But anyway, that's a really scary figure. 1 in 2 people who perpetrate elder abuse are a family member. That made me sad. 1 in 3 people who experienced elder abuse sought help from a third party. That means 2 in 3 didn't. They sought help from family members, I assume not the ones that were abusing them, friends, GPs or nurses, professional carers, police or lawyers. Okay, but what about my community? Autistic people of any age, so there's not just older people, all autistic people are far more likely than non-autistic people to experience bullying. As children, as adults, at school, at home, in the workplace, in any environment, we are far more likely to experience bullying, more likely to experience physical violence, significantly more likely to experience sexual assault, more likely to experience domestic violence, particularly coercive control. We are very, very susceptible to coercive control because we just, I don't know, I'll go into some reasons why in a minute, but we are. And intimate partner violence. There is buckets of evidence that across the whole age range, we are far more likely than the non-autistic community to experience all of those things. Lots of risk factors, internal risk factors, lack of awareness of potentially dangerous situations because of our social skills, difficulties identifying abusive relationships. Is this normal? Does everyone else if I don't understand social rules and I don't really know what other people's relationships look like, do I know this isn't right? Difficulty reading other people's intentions, uncertainty about social rules. Is it normal for people to do that? Am I supposed to behave like this because that's what they told me to do? Lack of assertiveness and a tendency to take people at face value. And lots of external and societal risk factors. A lack of awareness or understanding of autism. So if other people in the community don't understand what it's like to be me and my signs and signals, my body language, they're far less likely to notice that I'm being abused. Stigma and discrimination, social isolation, the pressure to fit in and that constant invalidation of feelings, instincts and experiences. So remember that 92% of us spend our whole lives hiding who we are and trying to mask the things that make us who we are. So if we spend our whole lives having our feelings and our emotions and our instincts invalidated and believing that the way that we think, the way that we feel, that the way that we act is wrong, you can imagine that makes us really, really vulnerable to abuse, to someone saying to us, no, you're just wrong, right? Your behaviour is wrong, your behaviour is, we just knock that out of you. Heightened passivity, people-pleasing, compliance, and we expect to be treated poorly. I mean, a group of people who have been bullied and abused their whole lives expect to be treated poorly. It's pretty normal. Lots of evidence that autistic people have often been multiply victimised. So whether that's repeated assault, so in a relationship where they're continually abused, or multiple abusive relationships. So they're abused as children, and then they go on and they form a domestic relationship where they're abused. They go into aged care and they're abused in aged care, and well, it's okay because that's what happened to me when I was married, that's what happened to me when I was at home. And so again, those two things come together. We get age-related violence and abuse, and we get autism-related violence and abuse. And lucky I wasn't using the clicker. And we sit in the middle of that. So we did some pilot. Remember I said there's no research? So I did some research with 118 autistic adults. That's a pretty small sample size, but it's actually more than all the research that actually exists, so I'm pretty proud of it. 118 autistic adults over the age of 55. Only half knew where to get help if they experienced violence, abuse or neglect. So I'm not saying they actually got help if they just knew that there was someone they could ask and had some idea where they could go. Less than half knew where to get help if they experienced discrimination or exclusive practices. So when you think about that, when we talk about that previous slide about abuse from the aged and of the age and that people who are experiencing abuse, this is a community that are more likely to be abused than any other, and they don't even have the first idea where to go and get help. They don't have the social connections, they don't have the relationships. So that was my first really depressing part. There's another sort of slightly less depressing part, and then there's some solutions, I promise. I'm not going to leave you all really, really depressed. Okay, so where does this leave us, and what do we wish that you knew about us? So, as I said, we don't grow out of autism, and we definitely don't get less autistic as we get older. In fact, so many people say to me, gee, I seem to get more autistic as I get older. I don't think we get more autistic. I think what happens is two things. First, we get absolutely exhausted from masking for so long, so hard, that we just lose the energy to keep doing it. And the other thing that happens is, as you get older, you think, why am I doing this to myself? Like, I'm just going to start to relax and be myself. So, just general things that I want all of you, whatever you do, not just in your jobs, but out there in the real world when interacting with people like me in the community, to be aware of things. We might need extra time to process questions, instructions and conversations. So if you ask an autistic person a question and they take a little while to respond, we're not stupid. We just need a little bit of extra. I'm not saying you think we are, but I can tell you a lot of people do. We just may need a little bit of time to process the question and respond. We experience sensory sensitivity. So like I said, lights, smell, noise. We have some interesting things in my family. My husband and my son, they like Parmesan cheese on their food. If they're going to have Parmesan cheese, I eat first and then I leave. Because I can't eat if they've got Parmesan cheese on the food. My husband, he likes to wear spray-on deodorant. He has to spray it on outside because I can't breathe. We experience anxiety about unexpected changes and events. So if you're going to change something, let us know. Like my slides. I've forgiven you, but wow, that was scary. We have difficulties in social situations. We socialise differently to non-autistic people. So, if you're inviting an autistic friend to an event, tell them who's going to be there, how many people, what's it going to look like. We have communication challenges, but we communicate differently to non-autistic people. It's not wrong. The way we communicate isn't wrong. It's just different. We like to be straight and blunt and honest. We like to communicate for a purpose and a reason. So if you ask me a question, I'm answering you. I might forget all the polite stuff that goes around it. You ask me if I like what you're wearing, you wanted an answer, right? And sometimes I forget that you have these weird social rules that mean you actually didn't want an answer. You wanted me to say something else. Well, then why would you ask me if you didn't want the answer? All right. We may experience shutdowns or meltdowns or periods of burnout when we just don't have the capacity to keep going, and we need to go sit somewhere quiet, which is why things like your sensory room in there are brilliant. All right, so that's just things to be aware of in the community. If you're working in healthcare, or you know anyone who's working in healthcare, things to remember. We may have difficulty understanding and communicating our physical symptoms. Many of us have a problem with interoception, which is that ability to perceive and understand and communicate the way we feel inside. So when I go to the doctor and they say, "Can you please describe the pain to me?" that question for me is virtually impossible, right? I don't really, it hurts. I don't have the right words. Sometimes I'm sitting there and I know I don't feel right, and my husband will walk in and he'll say, "Hey honey, it's like 40 degrees and you're sitting there in a jumper, you need to take it off, you're hot." I'm like, oh, that's what's wrong with me. I don't know, am I hungry, am I thirsty, do I need to go to the toilet? A lot of us have trouble really understanding how we feel. We may be reluctant to disclose our diagnosis to healthcare providers because we're concerned about stigma, because we've experienced it. Many of us will have multiple co-occurring physical and mental health conditions, so doctors need to know that and they need to learn about it. We may need extra time in medical appointments to allow for our communication challenges, and we may have a limited informal support system. We will struggle to find healthcare providers who have an understanding of adult autism. And you know what I would love to see? I would love to see a register somewhere where doctors could sign up and say, I have done some exploration of adult autism and I see patients who are adult autistics. That would be fantastic. Our community would love that, because it would be so amazing to find a doctor who actually understands that stuff and we could go and see them, rather than potluck you go see a doctor and they say, "Oh, you're autistic, I don't know anything about that." And you wouldn't believe how often that happens. Okay, social services. Anyone who's working in the social services area. Important things to know. We may already be in burnout when we come to see you, and we may have multiple co-occurring conditions. We may have a long history by the time we get to aged care services of not having any access to services that we need, especially if we didn't have access to NDIS. We may not know how to advocate for ourselves, or even that we're allowed to ask for help. We may think we've just got to struggle because that's what we've always done. We may be afraid to disclose or request necessary supports due to our fear and our experience of stigma. So we may not tell you we're autistic because we might think that that's not the right thing to do. And we will struggle to find service providers who have an understanding of adult autism. Aged care itself. We may experience significant distress leaving familiar surroundings if we move to aged care. I look around my house and all the things in there that make me feel comfortable, and I think, if I move into aged care, I can't take my dolls, I can't take my comfy chair, I can't take my... It really worries me. We may struggle with the sensory environment in aged care facilities. The lights are going to be too bright. What if they can't cater to my food sensitivities? What about the smells? We may experience significant distress and anxiety due to changes in routines. Like, do I have to go to bed when you want me to? Can I watch the TV shows that I used to watching? Is it going to be the way that I want my world to be? We may find the social environment really challenging. Like, do I have to interact the way they want to? Do I have to participate in all the games? If I don't participate in all the activities, will they decide that I'm unfriendly and unsocial and pathologise me? We may feel intense pressure to mask. Like, to me, it feels like school again. Like, when I was at school or at work, I had to hide all the things that made me autistic. And then I I describe myself as semi-retired. I semi-retired at 55 because I could not handle the pressure of going into work every day and hiding every single aspect of myself in order to cope in the workplace. And now I am me. I am unashamedly me, and I can be me. And I can walk around at home and I can stomp my feet and I can sing and I can do whatever I need to do. And I think if I go into aged care, is it going to be like going back into that place again where I have to hide me? I don't want that to be the end of my life. And we will struggle to find aged care providers who have an understanding of adult autism because they will tell me they don't have any autistic people. All right, so what now? How can you help us to survive and thrive as we age? Just 2 things, because Meg told me I was only allowed to ask you to do 2 things. All right, so thing number 1, we need comprehensive education on autism in late adulthood for those who are providing services to ageing Australians. Sadly, that comprehensive education can't be based on the research, because there isn't any. But talk to us, ask us. Talk to ageing autistic Australians and ask them what they want. Ask me. I can tell you a little bit. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm ageing, and I know lots of ageing people who would love to talk to you. And we need to open up conversations about autism with our ageing population and provide services, information and supports in formats and places that are accessible to us. And that's not necessarily the formats and places that they're currently in. So there's lots of good research there about formats of providing information that are appropriate for autistic people, the way that we process information, the way that we read information. So things like social scripts for going to doctors and services. I would love if I have to go into Centrelink or some other service to actually know what's going to happen, to know how it's going to be set up, what the waiting process is like, what the queuing process is like, who I'm going to see, how it's going to work. I can't find that information. It's not there. There's just an expectation that I'm going to go. I'd love that to be accessible in a way that makes sense to me as an autistic person. I'd love it to be placed in places that autistic people go for information. I'd love it if large organisations had a contact person specifically for autistic people that you could ask questions in a way that makes sense to us and get answers that make sense to us. Where I could say, I'm an autistic person and I'm anxious about this. I'm anxious about how this is going to work or how that's going to work. So those are my 2 things that I would love it if all of you went away and did, or as much as you can in your workplaces. And as I say, if you have questions about autism or about anything, I'm going to be sticking around most of today or as long today as I can handle the lights and the things, because there's lots of things that are happening today that I'd love to stay for. So feel free to ask me questions. Like I said, you can, if you want to get a copy of my book, you can, and I'd love to sign it for you, or ask me questions, or you can contact me on any of those things there. And thank you.
No. Whoa, that voice came out very loud. Sandra Thom Jones, your advocacy work is just, I'm so grateful, as we all are, for the work that you do, and that you're in this space is so important, that we have this level of insight and understanding and hopefully beginning to change some of our really discriminatory behaviours and systems. So thank you again, Sandra Thom Jones. But perhaps if you wouldn't mind, I don't know if this is out of what we thought about, but maybe questions from the audience now?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful. All right, so I'll bring a microphone over to you if you have a question for Sandra. I love this moment where everyone's like, God, will I do it? You're doing it! Hi, would you like to say who you are?
Hi, I'm Catherine Barrett from Celebrate Ageing. A wonderful presentation, thank you, very enlightening. I wonder if you think, is it ageism that we don't recognise older people as autistic? Is that ageist?
I think it's a combination of both. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why older people don't have a diagnosis, because in sort of historical terms, the diagnosis is fairly recent. And so, like, people of my generation weren't diagnosed as children. And so we're diagnosed as adults, and the 2 primary triggers for diagnosis are our children were diagnosed So, and this is what my first book was about, which is why it's called Growing Into Autism. So most of us who were diagnosed as adults, what happened is we went through life feeling like there's something wrong with me. I'm a fundamentally broken human being because I'm not like everyone else. I don't behave like everyone else. I'm just like, I've got to try harder, I've got to work harder. And then we had children. And we had these perfect children, like I did. Oh, my kids are amazing. And people started to say, oh, there's something wrong with your kids. And we're like, no, there's not. My kids are perfect. And then your kids are diagnosed with autism and you're like, but they're just like me. And I would say 90% of the autistic adults I know were diagnosed after their children. And the other way we get diagnosed is we are so overwhelmed from masking and from everything else, or from abuse that comes from being autistic, that we have some sort of crisis, physical or mental health crisis, and get diagnosed that way. So most people my generation or older were diagnosed as adults. And then there's so much stigma associated with it that a lot of people don't disclose. But as I say, a lot of people don't have a diagnosis in that generation. But the other thing that happens, and this is that other aspect of the stigma, is because we have coped so long, a lot of people say, oh, you can't be autistic. And I got that from, it was interesting because when I got my diagnosis, no one in my personal circle was surprised. All of my staff said, yeah, we knew that, we've always known that. My boss was like, yeah, fair enough. So no one who knew me was surprised. Strangers, however, I got quite a few emails from strangers with things like, well, you can't possibly be autistic because you're a pro-vice chancellor at university, or you're a researcher, or one woman said to me I couldn't possibly be autistic because I was married. So do you know what I mean? There is the stigma around autism and people's perceptions that all autistic people look like this, and that's not an adult, it's not a female, it's not someone who's articulate, it's not someone who's this, it's not someone who's that. And yes, then there's that dual stigma of ageing. So you put those two things together, and our ageing autistic community, and so glad we don't live in the US, because you've got a president there who says there are no such thing as older autistic people.
Thank you, Catherine. We look forward to hearing from you a little bit later today as well. Did you have your hand up? Hello. Can we say hi to you?
Yes, hi Sandra. That was fantastic. It was absolutely brilliant. I'm Carol. I've got a question for you. Now, I like you mentioned, I've got a friend that wasn't diagnosed till she was in her 40s. She was, and she was only diagnosed because her son was diagnosed, and she was like, that's me, etc., etc. And it was a huge relief for her to be diagnosed because she explained all her behaviours for all those years. What is being done to encourage or make it easier for people over 50 to be diagnosed?
Love your jacket. And the answer to your question is absolutely nothing. In terms of systemic stuff, government, quite the opposite. So for a long time, Medicare covered diagnosis up to the age of 13, and they very recently generously changed it to your early 20s. So basically, what if in our community, what's happening is people like me are saying, I think it's really valuable and important, because everyone I know who was diagnosed as an adult, it has resulted in a massive positive shift in their mental health, self-acceptance, well-being, ability to advocate for themselves, all of those sorts of things. But you have to self-fund it, because the government does nothing to support you. There is no financial support. There is no encouragement from the government, from the system. It has to be self-driven. So a lot of people self-identify, and there's lots of very good sort of online tools that you can do to sort of go and self-test. And really, that's the only thing that is available if you don't have the $2,000+ to go and get a diagnosis. And it's appalling, it's absolutely appalling when we look at the massive evidence that having that diagnosis has such a huge positive impact on people. You would think that our government would see sense that actually it could save a fortune in physical and mental healthcare costs by providing people across the age spectrum with access to that diagnosis. But they won't do it.
So there's no groups that you know of?
every group I know of is advocating in that direction. Every autism group, whether it's a formal group or it's an advocacy group or it's individuals, everyone is advocating for it and has been for decades. And the government, felt that their move to your early 20s was like a huge step. But yeah, I mean, it's been in every recommendation that's ever been made to any government inquiry at all, but they have no interest in shifting it.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Carol. Lovely to hear from you. Coming over here. I love this pause as I move towards you. The wonderful Vesna. I just knew that in my psychic.
Oh, thank you. Hi, I'm Vesna from Hobsons Bay Council. As you were speaking, I was thinking a lot about just the regular practice that I think would be welcomed by all of us as aged care or service providers, because everything you've said about helping alleviate anxiety, being open about what people can expect, I think is supportive of anybody that's going through accessing services, whether they're aged or disability or what have you. So I think that that's one thing that we can all take on and should. But it also made me think of two people in my life that are quasi-uncles. One's in their 70s, one's in their 90s, who I'm very certain lie further along the spectrum than I do. And they will never, ever receive a diagnosis. They won't ever talk about their diagnoses or their anxieties or their access to things or their social isolation. So as a person in their life, I'm really conscious of trying to help abate that. But autism didn't exist as far as they're concerned. And it would be nothing that I'd ever bring up with them, because I know that that's not a path they'll ever go down at their quite advanced age. But I think being kind and inclusive all the time is perhaps the best thing I can do. Is there anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, I think being kind and inclusive. I mean, I'm always wary of the sort of universal design aspect, because there are a number of things that are very specific to being autistic that are not universal design. So, like when I talk about things like sensory sensitivities, our communication challenges, our need for routine, our repetitive behaviour, those are quite different to non-autistic people. But the being kind, the generational thing, it kind of made me laugh there, because my dad is in his 80s, and my dad read my book, and then he rang my sister and he said, "Now I understand why all the guys at the bowling club are so weird." Because I go to the bowling club and they all want to talk about stuff afterwards. And I went there to bowl and then I go home, and now I understand. And he's like, "I'm autistic, aren't I?" So, yeah, and I mean, his generation, like, it wasn't even a thing. He'd never heard of it. And when I got diagnosed, it didn't mean anything to him. So, yeah, but sometimes it's just people have to come to it in their own time and in their own way. And I was really surprised that even for him, like, he's never going to go and get a diagnosis. Why would he? But for him, that realisation has been massive, because now it's like, oh, it's okay that I do these things. And so now I don't have to stay at the bowling club after I finish bowling and talk to the other guys and be really uncomfortable. I can just go. And now when he goes to the cafe that he always goes to for lunch, he keeps his hat on, so that, because of the lights, because he can. So, yeah.
Incredible, and really interesting insights around universal design as well. That was really great to hear your perspective on that. Probably, have we just got time maybe for one more question before we have a break and have some more coffee? Who have we got? Hello.
Hello. Last but not least, my name is Anisha Christoph from the Australian Multicultural Community Services. I was listening very carefully what you're saying, and I do come from a European country called Macedonia, where growing up these kind of things don't exist. And when I came here, I speak English as a second language, and many other people like me, maybe growing up, with autism, maybe 50 plus at the moment, and facing all these challenges, plus speaking English as a second, third, fourth language. How do we reach out to these people and encourage them to talk about their challenges as well? Are there any culturally and linguistically appropriate resources available to them? Where do they go and seek support? Thank you.
That is a really good question. My short answer is I don't know the answer. I haven't really come across anything good, but is my thing still up there? Contact me, because I'm going to find out, because I think that's a really, really important question. In terms of the research base, I can tell you there's very little research. The research that does exist says that incidence is across the board the same in every country. It's just more hidden in other countries. I know that there have been some translations of some good materials into some languages, but I'm not sure exactly which languages. It may be that there's not a lot of good stuff in Australia, but I do know like the UK does some really good stuff, but I don't want to send you in the wrong direction, like madly exploring. So email me through my website and I'll put some stuff together for you. And I might even put some links on the website once I've finished exploring, because I think it's really worth doing. If you ask me about China, I could say, because this really blew my mind, because you would think that that was a country that my book came out in China, in Chinese. I was so surprised. So for me, that was huge in terms of seeing that countries that have traditionally said autism doesn't exist and we don't have it, we're actually starting to see some real significant change. But that is something on my part that I need to do a lot better, is to try and find some really good materials in other languages or some links to other materials. So thank you for asking me that question, and thanks for prompting me to do something about that. So message me so I don't forget.
Incredible question and incredible answer, and obviously it's not all your responsibility to understand the intersections of culture and linguistic diversity, but what an interesting provocation that is, that if you haven't grown up in that world to understand that in the first place, and then you've got these other barriers. So I think it's something that we can all sort of take away and really think about. But there are lamingtons, there are cakes, there is joy to be had in the periphery of this room that you can go and explore. Before you do, though, again, what an absolute honour and pleasure to hear your insights today, and we are enormously grateful, Sandra, Thom Jones.